This is update for September 25, 2022, day 214 of the war and of the date update. So before we jump into this muddy conditions, actually would like to mention something I forgot a couple days ago. So it looks like India decided not to buy Russian oil for remainder of September and probably, depending on the conditions, probably also in the future. And what this really means is that Russian oil is not competitive enough, and basically the discount is not big enough for Indian refineries to make it enticing to buy. And the reason for that is the increases in interest rates, right? If you remember, the Federal Reserve just hiked the interest rate to about 3.25%, and it's really sending interest rates, and the other central banks doing similar things. So this is really creating global squeeze on commodities, all sorts of commodities. Basically, it's killing off demand, right? I spoke about this for a while, probably starting sometime in July or maybe even June, that the sort of West is facing a problem is there is less supply because of the misguided internal economic energy and economic policies, and then there's also this embargo on Russia. So that reduces supply significantly. The sort of wise thing is obviously not to reduce supply, but actually increase supply, right? So what's being decided to do is to actually easy pass. Let's reduce demand, and the way to do it, you just increase interest rates. That destroys demand because we live in that world, and so everything is priced of interest rates. So when interest rates go up, all assets go down, and including, for example, in US, the housing market started to initial signs of collapse and so on. So the same is going true for global commodities. Demand is starting to diminish, and this is actually the biggest problem for Russian leadership, for Russian economy, because this is what Soviet Union was facing actually in 80s, and in part it was a significant contributor to its collapse, the falling energy prices in the 80s. And the reason for that is that in the US, Paul Volcker was increasing interest rates. I think it was like as high as 16, 18, or even 20% in order to sort of tame inflation in the US. So as a result, it sent all of the commodities into a lot of pain. And that cut off supply of FX, foreign currency, to the Soviet government, which then created sort of domino effect in many ways. So this might be a similar situation, except the problem is that this is going to create a lot of pain in the Western world, because unlike the times of Volcker, where the indebtedness of the consumers and companies was sort of reasonable, let's put it this way. They had some debt. It wasn't like they didn't have debt, but it was reasonable. Now everybody is what's called over-leveraged to the maximum. So means like extremely high debt load in the whole system, and on the government level, on the companies level, on the individual level. So that guarantees maximum level of pain when interest rates going up. So at the same time, as that's what I said, the first signs of this interest rates going up is this drop-off of India as the buyer of the crude from from Russia. So we'll see as things start to develop, we'll see what happens there. In addition, related, economy-wise, related to this mobilization, because everybody's going to get paid similar sort of pay to what Russian contract soldiers getting. So that really puts huge dent in the Russian budget, state budget, because that's going to be extremely expensive. So we'll see how it plays out. It's already deficit budget at this point, which I said before. Russia used to have a profit budget, meaning there is a surplus. Now it turned into deficit, which means it spends more than it earns on the state budget level. That really means deteriorating state finances, and that really will sort of trickle down through entire economies, through the exchange rate of Russian ruble and so on. Right now, it's still it's not truly the market, but at least optically it looks at it's around 60. But eventually, it will start collapse under this Russian state deficits, essentially. So basically, so far Russia had very good, strong position financially. This position start to unravel, basically. That's at high level. Now let's switch to actually muddy season. And as you can see, this is International Max Pro, gets stuck in the mud. So they are kind of designed to deal with difficult road conditions. But as you can see, the level of difficulty is underestimated basically by the engineers. So this is going to be happening much more. And I suspect that those Caesars self-propelled howitzers will suffer similar problems. Those Susanas from Slovakia, essentially everything that's not tracked is going to have a lot of problems. However, even tracked vehicles have problems. And I discussed this, I think, in May, when I said that unfortunately, I don't know which way it is, but Soviet engineers after World War II decided to narrow the width of the tracks for whatever reason, not sure why. That created problems because all of these tanks don't have the same ability to get through the same kind of like muddy ground as the Soviet World War II tanks, and specifically T-34. However, even with this Soviet tanks, T-64, T-72, T-80, T-90, there is a difference actually, and there is a significant difference. So on here, this is T-64 wheels and the tracks, and this is T-72, but similar, the T-80, so it's the same kind of stuff, right? So T-90. So, and this is just the bigger picture. So the problem with, basically the bigger problem is actually with T-72, which is what Russian army employs in large numbers. Then T-80 and T-90. So the problem is that, as you can see, these wheels, they have rubber, and then the problem is mostly not the rubber, but they're way too wide. They're extremely wide. And then, as you can see on the other side, the tracks here are ideal for the mud to stuck on them, right? Because there is no holes, there's nothing, just plain, perfect surface. With the sand, it works, but with clay, which is in the Donbass region, it's kind of predominant type of soil. Also in Kharkiv region, it's black soil, so which is similar to clay, but actually in many ways I would say even worse. So from as a soil, but it's actually the best. But from a perspective of driving through it. So as you can see, so the mud basically gets stuck on these tracks, and eventually you have so much of this mud that the wheels they cannot. Basically, you get stuck. You can lose potentially the whole track, or you just get stuck. And the problem, because these wheels are too wide, so they don't self-clean essentially, right? Because the pressure from each wheel is not heavy, it's not high enough, and it's so wide that it's just, you know, putting one layer of this clay on over another until you got to this level that you can see on the picture. So the reason that T64 is better is because, as you can see, this first of all, wheels are much narrower, and the wheel itself is split into two extremely narrow pieces. So the pressure from each sort of half piece is much higher, and it's in a way kind of like a knife in many ways. And also you can see that the track itself is not just like a flat surface. It has some holes, and it's not, you know, it's kind of curved, so it allows to self-clean essentially. So ability to get through the muddy terrain for T64 is actually much better, much higher than T72, T80, and T90. Ukraine is using T64 primarily, while with exception, recently Ukraine starts to, because it's been losing so many of this T64, so it started to get T72 from Poland, from other countries in Eastern Europe, wherever they can get them. But the point is that T64 much better suited for this terrain, this road conditions, or the climate conditions, I guess. And T64 used to be produced in Ukraine, in Kharkiv. Now this plant has been, I would say, don't know for 100%, but majority of it being destroyed by Russian rocket strikes. And T72 is being produced in a little bit north of Yekaterinburg, which is Ural Mountains. I showed that, I think, in May. You can look for that video, basically where the main Russian production facilities are. So basically, this is just kind of quick, kind of like a refresh update, just educational, I guess, saying. So hopefully it helps people to understand the situation on the ground better. Now there's one more news, and there was from, I think, yesterday or even Friday. So Russian, I could say, president fired the head of the general who is responsible for the basically all supplying Russian army with everything, equipment, basically logistics and supply, who was in charge of logistics and supply. He was 70-year-old, and everybody was sort of cursing him that he's totally inept and unprofessional, couldn't do it, and he became a scapegoat. So there is a new person. His name is Mikhail Mizintsev. He's a little bit younger, 60-year-old, still probably too old for really changing the situation. But there are some changes in the Russian sort of military top, and they are marginally in the right direction. At the same time, we don't think they're really changing anything meaningfully. There are also some protests in some regions of Russia. There are protests against mobilization, so specifically Dagestan. I think there's also Yakutia, but those kind of like not non-core Russian regions. And what I mean by that is needs to be understood that Russia is a multi-ethnic society. It's not like a, you know, like when people say Russians, this is in many ways like the people would say like Americans, but people, let's say in America or Canadians, they coming from different ethnic backgrounds, right? So this is just a generic name for all different ethnic groups. And in Russia, those ethnic groups, it's very different from, let's say, Canada or the US, those ethnic groups, they live on their territories for past, let's say, 1,000 years. So they have their own language, and they're not sort of looking forward towards relinquishing that, right? So there's some level of separation. Throughout the Russian history, there's always been sort of heavy pressure, heavy oppression, sometimes genocide to sort of Russify those territories, which is basically conquered territories, right? That's why they speak different language, not because someone came to Russian territories. They were conquered over past, let's say 500 years of the Russian history. Let's put it this way. So it looks like there's a difference in Russia. Those call it more like where there's high number of Russian ethnic people. There's sort of no problem with mobilization. When in the regions where there's some kind of like ethnic groups, non-Russian ethnic groups, there are more problems with the mobilization. At the same time, it does still look that process goes on. Let's put this way, that whatever the goal is going to be, 300,000, 500 million, 1.5 million, that goal will be reached. To what level they are motivated, we will find out sort of on the battlefield relatively soon, because most of those soldiers, the situation is so desperate for the Russian command right now in Ukraine that I have very big doubt that they will get much of the training, even though it's technically promised to them that they're going to get a bunch of training. But that's the whole idea was how it was envisioned. Okay, we're gonna get already sort of like trained soldiers because they served in the army, they signed contracts and everything. But because, as I said, Russian drafting system is so dysfunctional, doesn't work well, so there's a lot of people, like it's kind of like a random number generator to a great extent. So the whole process got messed up, and now at least significant portion of these people, they probably never seen anything military-wise, and they may end up without much training on the battlefield. And we'll see what it means, because this is a large number, and regardless of the quality, large number still important and still matters. Now let's actually move to the let's just look at the military situation on the ground. As always, we're going to start from the very north, and the situation along the state border is somewhat quieter. There's still exchange of artillery fire, all of that, but it's a little bit quieter. Now let's actually move to North Luhansk front line. This is where Russian forces may experience in process of, let's say, looming disaster, and really depends on the Ukrainian side if it's able to actually fully exploit this weakness. But what's happening is Ukrainian forces moved even further towards east. They liberated this village Nove. Not clear where exactly. There's not enough information if they moved up north, because the road, the way it works here, we actually don't see it, but there's a like small river here, but the river valley is kind of swampy to extent. So the best thing is actually go up, and then I think actually here in Makivka there is a bridge here, in order to, because the end point, at least immediate one, is Svatove here, so you can see, right? And from what the Russian sources are saying is that defensive position here are being manned by 144th division, or let's put this way, leftovers of that division. There's sort of very small leftovers, and from basically the information that's being put there, it means that they are being essentially destroyed by Ukrainian forces, like basically kind of like sacrificing themselves to delay advance of Ukrainian forces. Also, there is units of the 3rd Mechanized Division, just don't know exactly location and so on, but basically in this area they're operating. And also, as I said, this bar 13 and 16, but they are sitting in Le Mans. So let's actually kind of look a little bit more at this whole situation. So Ukrainian, as you can see, Ukrainian troops kind of liberated this village Nove. I don't know if there was a move. It's probably also Kateryninka. If the move up, if they're moving up north, if they're moving up south, but the most logical path is actually to gain sort of more than just squeezing out of Le Mans, is actually move north, where I just showed into this to get the bridge across the small river. Forgot the name of it, but in this Makiyivka essentially, to cross and to get to this relatively large road that goes from Kupiansk and south to, I think it's actually highway, by the way. maybe, oh, actually I'm confused because highway goes things through Zoom. But regardless, so this is kind of like a slow motion kind of disaster happening here. Oh, and one thing I just want to confirm. So the information that Russian troops are in control of Donbass is correct. So I fixed the map. So it's showing sort of more correct information. And then also turns out that this 201st military camp is also operating here. So essentially, these units that are here, they are actually not on the front line. So basically, Russian command kind of formed battle groups from this 201st military camp, 3rd Mechanized Division, and 144th Division. Basically, leftovers of them, because if they're in full force, Ukrainian troops will not be able to attack. This is only happening because this is like they are shadowing themselves essentially at this point. And then this area is covered by this bars 13 and 16, all of this Drobasheva, Shamrihalova, and Liman, and probably Yampil as well, essentially. Now let's move. This is the situation on 23rd, as you can see. Then there was big progress on 24th. And actually didn't make 25th because there's pretty tiny progress with the capture of with the liberation of the village Nove. At the same time, the problem is that probably there is more movement. Unfortunately, I don't have enough information or confirmation to sort of say exactly the locations. So I do suspect there is more there, basically. But that's just kind of where it is. But the whole point is that this front line, this whole North Alliance front line is collapsing, and it's pretty much guaranteed that Ukrainian troops should be able to liberate Svatove, at least before the arrival of the mobilized troops. I think the way it goes kind of fairly slow. Ukrainian troops will not be able to will not be able to reach Starobitsk or liberate Starobitsk and get into this Rubizhny area and so on, because I believe that Russian command will start throwing all of this mobilized troops somewhere, and even if they are not super prepared, don't have sort of advanced weapons or enough of them, that just sheer number of them will be enough to slow down Ukrainian advances, essentially, at least for some time. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on in the North Donbass section of the front. Things here are pretty much the same as before. Everything's like a status quo. There's no changes. Ukrainian troops are trying to advance east. Russian here, Wagner mercenaries are counter-attacking in the direction of west in towards this Vyimka. There's still some action around Soledar, but no changes in the front line. Similar things are happening here south of Bakhmut, in around Zaporizhya. Sorry, Kordumivka. Pretty much, I would say, an uneventful situation in terms of real developments that matter. Now let's look what's going on the central Donbass section of the front line. Things here are somewhat quiet, just typical Russian attacks out of Pisky, then towards Nove, and then there was exchange of attack. Ukrainian troops attacked here out of Pavlivka towards south, and then Russian troops counterattacked. This is an example of this disastrous, actually, I would say, approach of Ukrainian command to attacks, because this is an area where Russian troops have artillery. It's prepared. They know like coordinates for all main points, so they can quickly react and inflict severe damage to Ukrainian attacking forces. And based on the failure of these attacks, there was no counter battery fire. There's no reconnaissance. All typical, just let's just move and hope and pray that everything is going to be okay, and it wasn't okay, as obviously you can imagine. So now let's move. Let's see what's going on here on the Zaporizhya front line. Things here are, as always, quiet. There's nothing new in this area. And then let's finish with Kherson bridgehead. Things here also, would say, they're not really quiet in terms of there are some small, like snail pace attacks and attempts to move, and they are very painful for Ukrainian side, probably painful for Russian side, but there is no real sort of breaches, no real advances, and the Ukrainian basically command is still focusing on destroying remaining supply routes over Dnipro River, which really means ferries and pontoon bridges. So as I said many times before, this is going to be death by thousand cuts. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.